Episode 2, History of the Condom. Hello and welcome to the second episode of Amorous Histories. I'm Annie Harrison, thank you for joining me, and thank you to everyone who has supported me so far with social media follows, likes and shares. Hopefully you'll like what you hear and keep spreading the word. And if you haven't already listened to my first episode about Harris's list of Covent Garden ladies, the 18th century list of sex workers in central London, then you'll give it a try after this episode. And if you haven't found my social media pages, I am at Amorous Histories on Instagram and Facebook, and at Amorous Histpod on Twitter. I've also set up a website where you can find my show notes and transcripts. That's amoroushistoriespodcast.wordpress.com. I'm going to go out on a limb here and guess that the majority of listeners have probably come into contact with a condom or barrier protection at some point in their life. They may or may not make an irregular appearance in your life, but how much do you actually know about condoms? They have a long and varied history that stretches back thousands of years, and I'm here to share some of that with you today. Please note that when I use the word condom, the majority of the time that will be in reference to barrier protection worn on the penis, but we'll also be talking about internal condoms. And while there is nothing sexually explicit in this episode, I am going to be saying the word penis a lot. What's in a name? Condoms, both those used on penises and internally, have been around for thousands of years, but no one can quite agree on where the name came from. In English print, condom first appeared in the 1706 poem by John Hamilton, the second Lord Belhaven and Stenton, called A Scots Answer to a British Vision, a piece of Scottish propaganda created when the negotiations leading up to the Act of Union between Scotland and England were taking place. And a few years later, Condom turned up in a 1709 literary journal. Some have theorised that condoms were named after a French town of the same name, although in France, condom is called a preservative. Others say it could have been named after the British monarch King Charles II's physician, Comdon or Conton, who prescribed a sheath for him to wear during sex to stop him fathering any more illegitimate children. You may hear him referred to as Colonel Condom. Many have argued that, like lots of words in the English language, condom must have Latin origins. In the process of their research, academic William E. Crook rejected condus, meaning one who stores, as a potential origin, as well as condom, meaning pot or cup. Another scholar, Zacharias P. Thundy, suggested that condumer was possibly an origin word, as con means with and duma means dome. More recently, Ain Collier posited that condoms was a corruption of the Latin cum dum, meaning sheath or scabbard. This latest hypothesis seems to be accepted as more likely than the other ones. However, the reality is we don't know, and we may never know the etymology of the word condom. Right, now we're going to go all the way back to circa 11,000 BC France, where there was a cave painting made of a man having sex with a woman whilst wearing a protective sheath on his penis. Depending on which sources you read, this is the first known depiction of a condom being used. In 3000 BC, we have mythic stories of the ruler of Knossos, King Minos, killing his mistresses with semen of serpents and scorpions. To avoid meeting the same fate, his wife Pasiphae inserted the bladder of a goat into her vagina before having sex with him. In the stories, this protects her from his poisonous semen, and she's still able to conceive, becoming pregnant 8 times. To me, this sounds like a classic advert for protection to prevent the spread of STDs. Or should that be sexually transmitted scorpions? Moving on to 1000 BC, an ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic gives us the third, or second depending on your sources, oldest record of condoms. These ones were made out of linen and dyed different colours for different levels of society. I'm not sure if there was a difference in quality or just colour, so if you do know, hit me up. Much like King Minos' wife, the Romans preferred animal intestines as protection. As legend has it, They also used the intestines of their slain enemies as condoms. Although that would be the ultimate FU, it more than likely didn't happen. Jumping forward to 1400s China, in the Ming dynasty they were using oiled silk paper and lamb intestine, as well as Gland's condoms. I'm going to explain what Gland's condoms are because, well, I had to Google it. They're still used today, and basically they're a little condom that goes on the top head bit, also known as the glands, of the penis. So they protect against pregnancy, but not sexually transmitted infections or diseases. Apparently they were painful and had a tendency to slip off and become stuck in the receiving person. From what I've read, in 1400s East Asia, Gland's condoms were mostly used by upper-class citizens, but once again, I'm not entirely sure why. At the same time, in Muromachi period Japan, they were using a hard protection with condoms made from animal horns and tortoise shell, which was made from the shells of turtles and tortoises. The Wellcome collection have a pretty cool box of Japanese tortoiseshell sexual aids from the 1930s, which I'll share an image of on my social media and link in the show notes. 16th century Italian Gabriello Falloppio of fallopian tube name fame conducted an experiment to see if people could be protected from contracting syphilis, or as the Italians called it, the French disease. In a book of the same name titled De Morbo Gallico, published in 1533, Falloppio describes a linen condom covered in saliva and fastened to the penis with a ribbon. People always think I'm having them on when I tell them condoms used to be tied on with a ribbon, but honestly they were. Falloppio experimented on 1,100 men, and he claimed that none of them caught syphilis whilst wearing his spit-covered condom. Moving on to the 18th century, condoms become quite common, especially for those partaking in casual sex or sex work. They were made from linen or the more popular choice of animal intestine, and once again they were tied on with a ribbon. In an article about condoms on her website, author Linda Lee Graham gives us the 7 steps to creating a condom 18th century style. After a quick trip to the butcher's for animal intestines, apothecary for sulphur and lye, and then to the haberdashery for some ribbon, you could get started. 1. Firstly, soak the intestines in water for several hours. 2. Soften the mess by soaking it in weak lye solution for a day or 2, changing the solution every 12 hours. 3. Scrape the mucous membrane off the intestinal material. 4. Soften the remaining matter over the vapour of burning brimstone. In other words, steam it over hot sulphur. 5. Wash what's left with lye soap and water. 6. Cut into oblong-shaped pieces and fold up into a sack. About 7 or 8 inches will do. 7. Punch tiny holes around the top edge and thread the ribbon through the holes. Apparently pink was especially popular. In 18th century London, the condom industry was dominated by 2 separate female traders, Mrs Phillips and Mrs Perkins. Mrs Phillips made and sold condoms for over 40 years, becoming a well-known name. You can see a reference to her in an etching by satirist James Gilray entitled A Sale of English Beauties in the East Indies, 1786, where a large parcel of what we assume is condoms have been shipped to the East Indies from England. The parcel was labelled Mrs Phillips, with a golden fan over her name in reference to a sign above her shop door in London. The parcel is addressed for the use of the Supreme Court. This is standing next to another box labelled For the Amusement of Military Gentlemen, with what appears to be copies of raunchy publications such as Fanny Hill, a book which is a whole other episode. So we can only imagine what these military men were obviously getting up to. In a 1796 collection of medical advertisements called A Guide to Health, Beauty, Riches and Honour, edited by F. Gross, there are multiple adverts regarding Mrs. Phillips. I'm going to read you page 12 as it gives us an insight into the condom trade at the time. This advertisement is to inform our customers and others that the woman who pretended the name of Phillips in Orange Court is now dead and that the business is carried on at Mrs. Phillips' warehouse. That has been for 40 years at the Green Canister in Bedford, Late Half Moon Street, 7 doors down from the Strand on the left-hand side. Still continues in its original state of reputation, where all gentlemen of intrigue may be supplied with those bladder policies, or implements of safety which infallibly secure the health of our customers. Superior in quality, as has been demonstrated in comparing samples with other of that pretended name of Phillips. We defy anyone to equal our goods in England, and have lately several large orders from France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and other foreign places. N.B. Ambassadors, foreigners, gentlemen and captains of ships, etc., going abroad, may be supplied with any quantity of the best goods in England on the shortest notice and lowest price. A most infamous and obscene handbill or advertisement in the name of Phillips is false. The public are hereby assured that the name is not Phillips, but this is her shop, and the same person is behind the counter as has been for many years. The following lines are very applicable to our goods. To guard yourself from shame or fear, votaries to Venus, hasten here. None of our wares ever found a flaw, self-preservation's nature's law. Letters post-paid, duly answered. Staying in the 18th century, famed Lothario Iachimo Casanova wrote about his use of condoms in his diaries as a way to protect himself and his partners from passing on diseases and infections. In an 1872 etching entitled Casanova and the Condom, held by the Library of Congress, we see him and another man both blowing into condoms to test for holes in front of 3 waiting ladies. I posted this on my social media last week, so if you want to go and take a look at it whilst you're listening, you can find it at Amorous Histories or Amorous His Podcast on Twitter. In 1839, American industrialist Charles Goodyear created vulcanized rubber. This is the process where sulfur and natural rubber are heated together to create a more stretchy and strong material. At first, rubber condoms only covered the glands of the penis, and a doctor measured each man and prescribed the correct size. But even with this, condoms would often slide down. I don't entirely understand how that would happen unless they're stretching and not sliding, and if so, what's the problem? Anyway, this led to condoms being made to cover the entire penis. However, their thickness and visible seams led many to compare them to rubber bicycle tyres. By the mid-1800s, Goodyear was mass-producing condoms for sale, making them more accessible for everyday Americans, which of course certain powerful white men didn't like. In 1873, the Comstock Act was passed into law across the United States to suppress the trade in and circulation of obscene literature and articles of immoral use. This included condoms and any information about contraception. Britannica.com tells us that, named for Anthony Comstock, the zealous crusader against what he considered to be obscenity, the Act criminalised publication, distribution, and possession of information about devices or medications for so-called unlawful abortion or contraception. Individuals convicted of violating the Comstock Act could receive up to 5 years of imprisonment with hard labour and a fine of up to $2,000. The Act also banned distribution through the mail and import of materials from abroad, with provisions for even stronger penalties and fines. The Comstock Act and its legacy are quite interesting and obviously horrific, so maybe that's an episode for the future. If you happen to be an expert on the Comstock laws, do get in touch. The early 20th century brought us disposable condoms. Yes, that's right. All the condoms we've heard about up until now have been reusable. After sex, they were washed, left to dry, and then ready to go again. Not because our ancestors vehemently believed in the 3 R's of reduce, reuse, recycle, but because they didn't have the money, time, or material to make a new linen or animal intestine condom every time they wanted to get it on. These new disposable condoms were made from latex, a seamless and transparent natural rubber. In 1916, German Julius Fromm led the way on latex condom production. His technique involved dipping a glass mould into a raw rubber solution to create thin, seamless condoms, much like the ones we know today. The condoms, named Fromm's Act, were patented, becoming the first ever condom brand. They were sold in packs of 3 with a slip of paper saying, please discreetly hand me a packet of 3 Fromm's Act, which could be secretly passed to the shop assistant when you needed to restock. Fromm's condoms proved to be very successful, and he began mass producing them in 1922 and opening up branches across the world. In 1930, he commissioned avant-garde Jewish architects Arthur Kohn and Siegfried Weitzman to create a flagship factory for his product. However, by 1938, Hitler's persecution of the Jewish people meant that Fromm was forced to sell his business for a pittance and moved to London, where he died in 1945. You can still buy Fromm's condoms today. They appear to have just undergone a rebrand. Google Translate said their mission statement is, "Because sex is not a one-night stand, but a celebration of tenderness," which, of course, in some circumstances, is absolute bull. During the World Wars, many countries supplied their troops with latex condoms, apart from the Americans because of those helpful Comstock laws. So instead, their troops got STDs. According to some sources I've read, they were reportedly rife with gonorrhea. In the 1950s, condoms developed further, becoming thinner, lubricated, and more form-fitting. The now standard reservoir tip semen collection was also introduced. When the HIV/AIDS epidemic came to the world's attention in the 1980s, the sales of condoms increased dramatically as fear and misunderstanding of this previously unknown virus circulated. Condoms became widely available in supermarkets, and marketing campaigns played on panic created by HIV/AIDS. If you're familiar with the Wellcome collection in London, you'll know that they have an extensive collections of adverts and publications relating to the epidemic and how it was received across the world. In my show notes, I'll link to some of the info about the history of HIV/AIDS. It's such a large and delicate topic that I couldn't possibly touch on today. Now to internal condoms. Despite the fact that the second instance of condoms usage we learnt about today was an internal condom, they faced a hard time. No pun intended. Although internal, or female condoms as they're sometimes called, despite the fact that they can be used anally as well, have probably existed in some shape or form for a while, when we think of them, we think of the 1993 condom launched in the USA by Danish inventor Lasse Hessel. Depending on who you are and where you are, your knowledge and experience of internal condoms may be largely different. When they were launched in the USA, the American media did not take kindly to them, describing the design in various pejorative terms, reporting that they were super difficult to insert, rustled during sex, and generally ridiculing them. This led to sales flopping. However, 2 years after they were introduced, the manufacturer, Wisconsin Pharmaceuticals, got a call from the Zimbabwean government to say that 30,000 women had signed a petition calling for the female internal condom to be available in Zimbabwe. With that, Wisconsin Pharmaceutical changed its name to the Female Health Company, and they began to work to distribute internal condoms across the world. Today, internal condoms still face a bad rap in countries like the USA and UK. Speaking from personal experience, in our one mildly useful sex ed class, internal condoms were mentioned in passing as female condoms, and we didn't get to touch it or see it up close. Instead, we all had to put condoms on fake blue penises, because obviously we all needed to know how to do that, and none of us were queer, asexual, or held certain religious beliefs. So we've looked at the history of condoms, but what about the future? In 2014, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation asked people to submit designs for the next generation of condom that would significantly preserve or enhance pleasure for those with a penis. Basically, the aim was to get more men to wear condoms to stop unwanted pregnancies and the transmission of sexual diseases. 812 entries were sent, and 11 were chosen to be pursued with grant funding of $100,000 each. Many of the condoms chosen are still in the production process. They're pretty much all thinner and stronger than the design we currently have, so we'll see where we go with that. There you go, a rather potted history of condoms. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. I definitely did. If you liked this episode, you can leave a little review and follow me wherever you get your podcasts from. I don't know if I've made it into iTunes yet, though, because Apple have made their process unnecessarily hard. You can also follow my socials at Amorous Histories on Instagram and Facebook, and at Amorous Hist Pod on Twitter. And my show notes / transcript is at amoroushistoriespodcast.wordpress.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Probably with something spooky and sexy, as it's now October. Think witches or vampires. There's so much potential. Until then, I've been your host, Annie Harrison, and this has been the Amorous Histories podcast.